Members.
Thank you, Count Corla, and I want to begin by offering my condolences, as always, to the families who've lost loved ones during this pandemic, and again to pay tribute to all of those who are on the front line for our country during this time of great challenge. I welcome, of course, the opportunity to update you on the House on the ongoing economic and budgetary situation. The necessary measures introduced to protect public health and to combat the spread of the COVID-19 virus have resulted in a severe contraction in economic activity both at home and abroad. Recently, my department published the Stability Programme update. We indicated in the debate on the House on that report that we expect the national income of our country to fall by 10.5% this year, and unfortunately we expect approximately 220,000 jobs to be lost, with unemployment, of course, already peaking in the second quarter of this year. On the budgetary front, the general government balance, I indicated then, at that point, was at €23 billion. That was on the basis of decisions that had been made up to that point, and I indicated the possibility of it growing further beyond that towards, indeed, €30 billion. Given the radically uncertain outlook we now face, it's very important, Count Corla, that I emphasise the level of uncertainty that attaches to the figures I have just shared there. I want to stress at this point that the indications that we have regarding the performance of our economy, particularly the budgetary indicators that we have, when expressed as a share of the national income of Ireland, are currently in line with what we see unfolding internationally. All countries are facing very similar challenges. This is, of course, most evident to us in where we are with the number of people who have lost their job during this crisis. Around 460,000 citizens are now in receipt of income support from their employer through the temporary wage subsidy scheme. We now have just under 590,000 recipients of the pandemic unemployment payment. Along with the 215,000 individuals on the live register, it now means that we have 1.25 million of our citizens who are now in receipt of income support from the state. In the longer term, this is neither sustainable nor is it affordable for an economy where we have growth that's based upon a private sector that's generating employment upon which we can then deliver the public services that we need. We're seeing the change that is taking place in our national finances as a result of this change in employment beginning to have a sharp effect. Exchequer returns for April showed a deficit of 7.5%, €7.5 billion, and to date the level of support to the economy from the government amounts to over €13 billion. It is the right and the appropriate economic policy for the government to run a deficit when the private sector has experienced a demand shock of this magnitude. We are doing this so that we can limit the loss of income for companies and employers, and to preserve economic activity and living standards in the face of this terrible shock. These decisions now, I believe, lay the foundation for recovery at a later point. We, however, can only do this because of decisions that were taken in the management of our public finances in recent years. In particular, the deliberate policy of gradually and over time eliminating a budget deficit and then running to a budgetary surplus. This has given us the credibility and the capacity that we need as a state to be able to borrow the level of funding we are now borrowing to respond back to the shock that has been felt in every home and in every parish in Ireland. Moreover, the economic turmoil is the result of a public health crisis. It's the result of a public health decision. It's not a result of an economic decision. We're now entering into this period from a position of strength. And my approach has been to try to gradually improve our public finances in anticipation of a difficulty at a point in the future. But of course, this kind of difficulty and its magnitude could not have been seen then. So we expect public debt to increase significantly this year. That is appropriate and in line with what has been seen internationally. We can finance this at a very low cost at the moment. But Ceann Comhairle, I can't ignore the reality of constraints that will emerge at a point in the future, whether they be budgetary, whether they be monetary, or whether they be decisions that need to be made by a future government. The Taoiseach and I have both pointed this out recently. We know only too well what can happen if sentiment towards a country changes, and it's really important that our budgetary position in the future does not become an outlier versus the experiences of other countries. As deputies will be aware, the gradual unlocking of our economy began on Monday. However, it's already very clear that the new economic normal will clearly be different from that of the old. Activity in some firms, including, of course, in our hospitality sector, is likely to be below capacity for some time to come. This will necessitate the kind of supports that are now in place. Some firms, some business models that were viable pre-COVID-19 may no longer be viable in the future. So the priority for this and the next government must be to galvanise our resources to support companies, employers, to be in a position to succeed in this new environment. On May the 2nd, the government agreed a further package of measures to support businesses negatively affected by COVID-19 to accelerate their readiness for dealing with this new reality. The House is familiar with what they are already: the Restart Grant, a commercial rates waiver, delivering and developing now a pandemic stabilisation and recovery fund, getting the legislation ready for a credit guarantee scheme, and the warehousing of tax liabilities for a period of up to 1 year following the recommencement of trading. These measures complement the previously announced measures that mainly, though not exclusively, focused on households and employees. We have the ability, because of these measures and because of the agility and entrepreneurship at the heart of the Irish economy, to rebuild from this crisis. Protecting those who have seen their lives and their livelihoods upended is the most responsible course of action that the government could take, and this is what we have done. But these measures that we have introduced, which we can sustain for a period of time, cannot and will not last forever. They are appropriate at this phase of the pandemic, and the budgetary impact of these measures that we have taken during this crisis will, in a large part, be addressed by our citizens going back to work. But it is an inescapable reality that there will be a cost to the state from these measures, and these costs will have to be addressed. Responsible budgetary policies over the medium term will do much of the heavy lifting. Sustainable and steady increases in public services and living standards, underpinned by steady economic growth, is the best way of correcting the budgetary challenges that we will have in the future. But Ceann Comhairle, I need to remind the House that while there has understandably been a huge focus on the pandemic in recent weeks and months, it is also the case that this is not the only challenge that is facing us. Negotiations between the EU and the UK on a future relationship are ongoing. The current transition will end on the 31st of December this year, unless a decision is taken jointly to extend it. And overall, the interplay between the economic impact of the pandemic and the possible end to the transition period without a future trading relationship being in place, or with a limited trading relationship being in place, will have very significant implications for our economy and for our public finances. So just as the government, with the support of the House, has to be ready for these kind of scenarios, I'd also emphasise, unfortunately, to businesses today that our period of preparation for dealing with reopening our economy, for dealing with the consequences of COVID, must also have an eye to where we all could be in dealing with Brexit towards the end of this year. And to conclude on that point, Ceann Comhairle, while I'm aware of how great the risks are, while I'm aware of what the level of uncertainty is in companies, in families, with our citizens today, I have little doubt, Ceann Comhairle, that we can rebuild our economy, that we can get our citizens back to work, and that we can yet again build an economy that's capable of meeting the needs and aspirations of all who depend upon us. Thank you.